The door was locked from the inside. This was the fact that everything else had to arrange itself around. Whatever else could be questioned or reframed or absorbed into a more comfortable account, the locked door held. It was not metaphorical. It was not ambiguous. It was a door with an iron bolt on the inside, and the bolt was thrown, and Owen Marsh had stood with his hand on the latch in the April mud and felt its resistance, and known what it meant before he had finished knowing. He had ridden 3 days to find this out. He had left his horse at the gate and walked the path to the cabin with the controlled movement of a man who had decided not to let fear set his pace. The fear had been with him since December, when a letter arrived from the nearest settlement saying that Clem Marsh had not been seen since October. The fear had a specific shape. His father, 64 years old, alone in a hill country cabin, in a winter that had started early and hard, not seen, no word, no indication, nothing. He had lived inside that shape for 4 months and had become, through long proximity, almost accustomed to it. Accustomed to fear was not the same as unafraid, and he walked the path with his hands loose at his sides and his eyes on the door and the cold chimney and the unmarked mud of the yard. He looked at the cabin as he walked. The chimney cold. No smoke for who knew how long. The single window on the south side filmed with the grime of a closed winter. The woodpile on the porch diminished from what it had been in October when Owen had last stood here, which meant wood had been used, which meant the fire had been kept, which meant his father had been alive long enough to burn through most of a winter's supply. The yard was soft with the spring thaw, the ground beginning to show through in the lower spots, and in the yard there were no tracks. Nothing recent. The mud unmarked by any boot or any animal, larger than the birds that had left there, small impressions near the porch steps. He came to the door and found it locked from the inside. He had noted all of this and come to the door and stood there for a moment before he tried the latch. The way you stood before, opening something you were not sure you wanted open. Then he tried it and felt the resistance. He stood with his hand on the latch and listened. Not silence exactly. The spring birds were in the timber beyond the clearing, and the creek was running high with snowmelt and audible from here, and the wind moved through the new leaves of the oaks at the clearing's edge, with the particular sound of spring wind in new leaves. These sounds were all there, and underneath them, from the other side of the door, nothing. He said, "Father." He said it quietly, as though he were not certain he wanted an answer. He waited. Then, from inside the cabin, muffled by the door, blunted by the thickness of wall and air between the voice and his ear, his father's voice, it said, "Who's there?" Owen put both hands on the door frame and stood that way for a moment. He said, "It's Owen. It's your son." A pause. Then the sound of the bolt being drawn. Then the door opened, and his father stood in the doorway, and he was alive, and he looked at Owen with the expression of a man who has just been woken from a long sleep and is still finding the edges of a room. He said, "Owen, what are you doing here?" He said it as though it were October, as though Owen had ridden over from the neighboring property on an ordinary afternoon for an ordinary reason, as though it were not April, as though 4 months had not passed since any person had seen or heard from him. Owen looked at his father, and his father looked at him. He said, "It's spring, Father. It's April." His father looked past Owen at the yard, at the mud, the new growth at the clearing's edges, the quality of the light that was unmistakably April and not October or November. He said, "That can't be, right?" Owen said, "It is." His father looked at the yard for a long time. He said, I only just had my supper." His name was Clem Marsh, and he was 64 years old in the spring of 1891, and he had lived in the hill country of the Missouri Ozarks for 37 years, the last 12 of them alone in the cabin that Owen had ridden 3 days to reach. He was a man for whom the internal life was primary, not cold, not damaged by the solitude he had chosen, but constituted for it in a way that most people could not understand from the outside. He found other people interesting, but not necessary. He had built his daily existence around the rhythms of the land rather than the rhythms of community, and had found this more than sufficient across 37 years of evidence. When Owen's mother died in 1879, the 3 children had discussed what to do about their father. The discussion had been brief because their father did not need doing about. He had attended the burial with the quality of grief that was his, inward and total and visible to his children even when invisible to everyone else. And he had returned to the cabin and continued. In the 12 years since he had given no indication that continuing required anything from the people who had come from him. He kept good stores. He maintained his property without deferred labor. He had no serious illness. He was, by every account, a man who knew how to be alone and did not need watching. Owen had not worried about him until December. He had last visited in October, the usual autumn visit. His father had been himself, quiet, self-contained, faintly resistant to the visit in the way of a man whose independence was important to him, and who experienced even the company of people he loved as a mild imposition. They had spent 2 days together and parted without ceremony, and Owen had ridden home and thought little about it. In December, a man from the nearest settlement, a community of perhaps 40 families 3 miles south of his father's property, with which his father had occasional commerce, had written to say that Clem Marsh had not been seen since October. The letter noted carefully that this was not necessarily alarming. He was a man who kept to himself, and his absence from the settlement for weeks at a stretch was not unusual. But December was December, and no smoke had been visible from the road at his chimney, and no one felt they had the standing to check on a man who had made his preferences about visitors clear. Owen had read this letter and sat with it for a long time at the kitchen table of his own farm, in the specific way he sat with things that required something of him. He had made preparations and could not leave immediately, because his own farm was at a moment that did not permit absence, and he had spent 2 weeks managing the competing obligations with the guilt of a man who knew the correct choice and was not yet making it. In February he had made it. He had ridden out and been turned back by roads that were impassable. In March he had tried again and been defeated by a late snowfall that closed the routes for another 3 weeks. Each failure had added weight to the shape of the fear, and the shape of the fear had become, by April, something he carried in his body as much as his mind. A specific tension in his chest that did not ease until he heard the bolt draw back. In April the roads were passable, and he was out of reasons to delay, and he rode 3 days, and found the door locked from the inside and his father in the cabin, alive, having supper. He stood in the doorway for a moment longer than was necessary. His father stood on the other side of it with that waking expression, finding the edges of a room, and Owen looked back and tried to hold what he was seeing alongside what he had prepared himself to see on the 3-day ride. He had prepared himself for death. He had prepared himself for a man diminished by isolation and winter and the accumulated weight of 64 years in a hard country. He had not prepared himself for this, for a man who looked, in the rough morning light, essentially fine. The cabin was warm. This was the second shock after his father's appearance, genuinely warm. The fire built up well, the kind of warmth that required sustained attention and did not happen by accident. Someone had been keeping that fire. Owen came inside and stood in the middle of the room and looked around. Everything was his father's cabin in every detail. The same arrangement of furniture unchanged in years of visits. The same tools on their hooks. The same worn chair by the fireplace with the same quilt folded over its arm. Everything as it had been in October, but diminished in the ways that a winter's use diminished things. The woodbox lower, the larder visibly depleted, the candle supply reduced. The evidence of a winter spent. Ordinary winter evidence. His father looked well. This was the thing that refused to resolve into sense. No significant weight loss, no pallor, no tremor, no evidence of a man who had been without sufficient food or warmth through a Missouri winter. He had the slight dishevelment of long solitude, but beneath that he was simply himself, the same man, 64 years old, and present and alive, and entirely unbothered by the fact of being so. Owen made coffee. His father sat in his chair by the fire and put his hands on his knees and looked at it with the expression of a man trying to find something there and not finding it. He did not press for the account immediately. He was aware that whatever the account was, it required his father to be warm and fully present before it would be useful. He put his own food on to warm from his pack, because he had assumed correctly that whatever he found at the cabin would not include a well-stocked larder. He sat across the table and watched his father and tried to assess what he was looking at. The thing he kept returning to was that his father looked well. Not merely alive, well. The slight dishevelment of a man who had been alone for a long time without occasion to attend to his appearance, but beneath that the same man, the same constitution, the same particular quality of Clem Marsh that had been there in October and had apparently been maintained through 4 months of a Missouri winter, with no memory of the maintaining. He slept badly that first night. He lay in the small second room with the spring night coming through the window he had opened. The creek, the first frogs, the ambient sound of a season that had arrived while he had been preparing for the worst, and he turned over what he had found and could not make it settle. He thought about December in this cabin, the fire, the cold outside and the warmth inside, his father's chair and the quilt and the careful hash marks on the wall accumulating through January, February, March, the deliberate, competent management of a difficult season, conducted in his father's manner, by whatever had his father's hands. He had thought about whether his father's life during those months had been his father's life, or something else's life conducted in his father's manner. He had not been able to arrive at an answer that distinguished between the two with any clarity. Eventually, the morning had come and he got up. Owen said, "What do you remember of the winter?" His father was quiet in the way Owen associated with a man trying to recall a dream, reaching toward something that had the texture of memory, but not the substance, the shape of recollection without the content. He said, "I don't remember the winter." Owen said, "Nothing." His father said, "I remember October, the last week of October, very clearly. The cabin in good order, the stores laid in, the wood stacked. I sat by the fire that last evening and thought it was going to be a long winter. The cold came early and had a quality to it I have felt only a few times in 37 winters here, a quality that meant the winter would be serious. I thought, I have everything I need, and I will stay close, and by spring it will be over." He said, "And then you are knocking on my door, and it is April." Owen said, "The door was locked from the inside." His father said, "I lock it every night." Owen said, "There are no tracks in the yard, no tracks anywhere on the property, no evidence that you have been outside since the ground went soft." Father: 4 months. His father looked at his hands on the table. He said, "I know it's not right. I'm only telling you what I know, which is that I remember October, and I do not remember anything between October and tonight's supper. There is nothing there to remember. Not blackness, not sleep. Nothing." "October, and then you at the door," Owen said, "and you are not alarmed by this." His father looked at him for a long moment. He said, "Alarm seems like the right response. I find I am not alarmed. I find I feel rested." He said the word with the uncertainty of a man who has found something unexpected in his own interior. Rested and full and warm. As though whatever happened in those months was not difficult. As though I was maintained. Owen said, "Maintained." His father said, "It's the word that comes." He stayed 4 days. On the second day, while his father was outside attending to the property with the methodical energy of a man resuming an interrupted routine, Owen went through the cabin the way you went through a space that contained a question. Slowly, completely, looking for what the winter had left behind. He found the winter's evidence everywhere, and it was ordinary. The wood box had been refilled and emptied in the pattern of a wood supply, managed carefully through a long cold season, the hash marks on the rough wall beside it showing the winter's accounting, from the full complement of October to the depleted state of April, in his father's hand. The same deliberate marks his father had always made. The larder record on the shelf showed the same story. A ledger of provisions maintained in the same careful manner, the autumn's abundance reducing through the winter's need to early spring's modest reserves. The chair by the fireplace showed the wear of extended use, the particular compression of the seat cushion, the darkening of the armrests, more than October would account for. A winter's worth of sitting in one chair, and on the table, the journal. His father had kept one since Owen was a boy, not a personal record in the reflective sense, but a practical daily log noting weather and work, and the small events of a day lived carefully alone. Owen recognized the worn leather cover. He opened it. October filled the first quarter of the current journal. Daily entries in his father's hand, the weather and the work and the small observations that made up a life managed alone. October 28th. Cold tonight. The serious cold. I feel it in the way I have felt it only a few times in 37 winters here. This will be a winter that asks something. I have what I need. October 29th. Wind from the north. Kept the fire high. Inventory complete. All in order. October 30th, the last entry. Quiet today. The timber is still. I sat by the fire in the evening, and I had the feeling that I have had once or twice before in this place, in winters like this one. The feeling of being watched, but not in the way of threat, in the way of attention. As though the winter had an eye, and the eye had found me and was looking, and found what it was looking for. I do not know what this means. I write it down because I have learned to write down what I notice. And this is what I noticed, and then learn nothing. The next page, and every page after it until April 4th, 1891, was blank. The entries resumed on April 4th, the day Owen had arrived, in the same hand, in the same tone, noting the weather and his son's arrival, and the state of the property, as though October 30th and April 4th were consecutive days with nothing between them. Owen sat at the table with the open journal for a long time. He thought about what his father had written on October 30th. The feeling of being watched, the winter with an eye, the eye finding him and finding what it was looking for. He thought, who built the fires through January, through February, through March? The fires that kept the man alive, that consumed the carefully managed wood, that held the cold outside, while something inside the locked cabin survived a Missouri winter. He thought, "My father built those fires. The evidence says so. His hands, his habits, his records, the deliberate hash marks, the ledger maintained in the same manner." He thought, "And my father does not remember building them," which meant either his father had built them and could not account for the building, or something had built them in his father's manner, in his father's place, with his father's hands, while his father was somewhere else entirely. He did not know which of these possibilities was more unsettling. He was not certain they were different possibilities. He turned back to the blank pages and touched them. Ordinary paper, not discolored or damaged, not different in any way from the pages that held handwriting. Simply blank, white and present, the way empty space was present without implication. Whatever had kept the fire and eaten the stores and written the hash marks had left no record of itself in the only place his father kept records. It had maintained, somehow, that the record was his father's and not its own. It had kept that boundary. Owen closed the journal and set it back where it had been. On the third day he brought it up on the porch, the two of them with coffee in the first warmth of the returning season, the yard beginning to dry in the strengthening April sun. He said, "Before October ended, did you notice anything unusual about the place?" His father was quiet for a moment. He looked at the timber at the clearing's edge, the same timber he had looked at on every morning of 37 winters. He said, "In the last week of October, when I was finishing the wood in and doing the last of the outdoor work before I intended to stay close, I was in the north clearing, splitting the last of the oak, and I had the feeling." He stopped. He said, "I have never told anyone this. I don't know if it means anything." Owen said, "Tell me." His father said, "I had the feeling, very strongly, that the place was attentive, not watching me in the way of something that might harm me, not that kind of attention. The attention of something that had been present in a place for a long time and was simply aware of what was in it, the way a room is aware of what's in it. And then, something else, which I have no better word for than acceptance, as though whatever had been attending to me had looked at me and found me acceptable. Found me fitting." He said, "I went inside after that, and I had my supper, and I wrote in the journal, and I went to sleep." Owen said, "And you woke up, and it was April." His father said, "And I woke up, and it was April." They sat with this in the mild spring warmth. Owen said, "I am afraid of it, of the thing that looked at you and found you fitting and kept you through a winter without your knowledge or consent, and returned you in the spring with no memory of it. I do not know what it cost you, and you cannot tell me because you were not there to experience the cost, if there was one. I cannot know whether to be grateful for your life or angry on your behalf about the winter you did not have." His father looked at him for a long moment, said, "I know. That is the part I cannot give you, the part that would let you decide how to feel about it. All I can tell you is what I find when I look inward. Nothing missing, nothing that should be there and is not. The winter is not a wound in me. It is simply absent, a season I do not have in a life I otherwise have fully." He said, "Whatever it used me for, or found in me, or took, or gave, I am here, alive. I do not think it meant me harm." Owen said, "Intent and harm are not the same thing. A man can be used without malice and still be used." His father considered this. He said, "Yes, that's true." He paused. "Are you asking me to leave the cabin?" Owen said, "I'm asking you to consider it." His father was quiet for a long time. He looked at the timber, the clearing, the cabin behind them, the specific shape of the property he had lived on for 37 years. He looked at all of it with the look of a man taking inventory of something he loves and deciding whether love is sufficient reason for what he is about to say. He said, "I am not going to leave." Owen said, "I know." His father said, "I have been here 37 years. Whatever is in this land, I am part of it now, the way you become part of a place after long enough. And whatever it found fitting in me, whatever it looked for and found, is made of those 37 years. Would you have me leave the place that made me what it found fitting?" Owen said, "I would have you alive and here next April." His father said, "Then we agree." He looked at the timber. "If it happens again, it will happen again. And in April you may find me as you found me today, alive, rested, fed, with no account of the winter. I will tell you I had my supper last night, and you will tell me it is April, and we will sit on this porch in the spring sun and drink coffee." He said, "I can think of worse outcomes." Owen said nothing for a long time. Then he said, "I will come in April. Every April." His father said, "No, you will." He stopped on the second day of riding at a settlement tavern and sat by the fire for an hour and tried to compose the letter he would need to write to his siblings. His sister in St. Louis, his brother in Kansas City, both of them with families and lives that had moved far enough from the hill country that they would receive the account with the mixture of relief and bewilderment that distance produced. He tried to find the language for what had happened. Father is alive. Father is well. Father has no memory of the winter. The door was locked from the inside. He could not find language that held it. The facts were simple enough stated plainly, but the plain statement produced a shape that required explanation, and he had no explanation. He had the facts and the blank pages and the warm fire in the cabin and his father's face in the morning light, looking at April as though October were only yesterday. He sat by the tavern fire and thought about what his father had said in the north clearing, the feeling of the place being attentive, the feeling of being found fitting. He thought about what it meant to give 37 years of complete attention to a piece of land, not the divided attention of a man with a community and obligations and social claims on his time. The specific, concentrated attention of a man who had organized his entire existence around the rhythms of a single property for 37 years, through every season, through loss and weather, and the slow accumulation of a solitary life. He thought, the land knew his father. It had known him for 37 years. And whatever knowing a place did with a man over that duration, whatever it accumulated and held and eventually recognized, his father had crossed some threshold of that knowing and been found sufficient for whatever the serious winters required. Fitting. He rode home the next morning and came back the following April. He came back in April of 1892 to find his father on the porch, drinking coffee in the spring sun, with the ease of a man who had been expecting company. Owen tied the horse and came to the porch. He said, "How was the winter?" His father said, "I don't know." They looked at each other. Owen said, "Again." His father said, "Again." Owen said, "The door." His father said, "I expect it was locked from the inside." Owen said, "I didn't try it. I could see you on the porch." His father almost smiled. He said, "Sit down, have some coffee. It's a fine morning." Owen sat. He took the coffee his father poured and looked out at the yard, at the clearing, at the timber at its edge. The spring birds were in the high branches. The creek was running. The light was the particular light of an April morning in the hill country, clear and new and generous in the way of spring light that had not yet become ordinary. He said, "Are you afraid of it?" His father was quiet for a moment. He said, "When I was a younger man, I would have wanted to understand it. I would have found the not understanding intolerable. He paused. Now I find that what I want is to be here, in this place, with the spring coming in, with my son beside me. What happens in the winters happens. What I have in April is the spring. Owen looked at his father. He said, "You accept it." His father said, "I accept it. It has not harmed me. It has not diminished me. Each spring I am here, and I am myself, and the winter is something I did not experience and cannot account for and cannot get back. And I find that what I lost is only time, and time was always something I was going to lose." Owen said, "You lost more than time. You lost the experience of it, the living of it." His father said, "Yes, but I am not sure the living of it was mine to have." He looked at his hands in the morning light. "Some winters are for the land. This appears to be one of mine." He said this with the quality Owen had known from childhood. A man who has arrived at a position through long thinking and will hold it, not unkindly, but firmly. Owen sat with his father on the porch in the April sun and thought about what it meant to give a life to a place so completely that the place could claim a season of it and leave the rest intact. He thought about the word his father had used when asked what the attention of the place had found in him. Fitting. He had been in that land for 37 years and had been found fitting. And the fitting was made of the years. You could not have one without the other. On the last evening before he left, he and his father sat at the kitchen table, and Owen said, "I am going to come every April, for as long as you are here." His father said, "I know," Owen said, "and every April you may not know where October went." His father said, "That seems likely." Owen said, "And you are at peace with that?" His father looked at the fire. He said, "I am at peace with what I cannot change," which is not exactly peace. It is more like the thing you arrive at when you have finished arguing with the unchangeable. A settlement, a decision to live within the terms of what is, rather than what you would prefer. What I would prefer is to remember my winters. I would prefer this. I am not going to have it. And so I will have what I am given, which is the springs and the autumns, and the sense of being where I belong through the winters I cannot have. He said, "It is not everything, but it is what is offered." Owen looked at his father. He said, "Does the place know you are grateful?" His father looked at him with something that might have been surprise. He said, "I have never considered that question." He was quiet for a moment. "But yes, I think it does. I think it has known everything about me for 37 years. I think that is precisely the problem and the solution." Owen rode home the next morning in the early spring light, carrying the specific weight of something he had begun to understand rather than merely observe. He thought about the October 30th journal entry, the feeling of being watched, the winter with an eye, the eye finding him and finding what it was looking for. Fitting. He had been in that land for 37 years and had been found fitting for whatever the serious winters required, and he had been kept through them and returned in the spring, and he was his father, entirely, with the springs still ahead of him. Owen came back the following April and the April after that. He came every April for 11 more years, 13 in all. Some years his father was on the porch when he arrived, having heard the horse on the road. Some years Owen had to knock and wait and hear the bolt draw back. Some years the fire inside had been built high, as though anticipating company. Some years it was the steady moderate fire of a man tending only himself. Some years the larder was lower than others. Some years the woodpile nearly gone. The hash marks on the wall always ran to the same place. the bottom of the accounting space his father had always used, and no further, because there was no further to go, because the winter was always over by the time Owen arrived, and there was no more wood to count. The pattern held without variation. The evidence of a winter lived, woodbox depleted, larder consumed, hash marks in the same careful hand, the journal with its blank pages between October and April, and the man himself returned, unhurt, without a single day of it in his memory. Owen had slept badly on the first night of that first visit, lying in the small second room with the window open to the spring and the creek audible below, turning the facts over in the way his mind turned things it could not settle. He thought about December in this cabin, the fire, the cold outside and the warmth inside. His father, or whatever had been his father for those months, sitting in the chair where the quilt was folded, tending the fire, eating the stores methodically, making the hash marks, keeping the ledger. The deliberate, competent management of a difficult season. He had thought about what it would mean to do all of that without knowing you were doing it. To maintain a life while being, in some sense, absent from it. He had thought about whether his father's life during those months had been his father's life or something else's life, conducted in his father's manner, with his father's hands. He had not resolved this. He had not resolved it across 13 springs of returning. He had simply let it be what it was, a fact about the place and the man and the arrangement between them. And he had come back every April to verify that the arrangement was still holding, which it was, until it wasn't. There was one April, in the middle years, when he arrived and found the door locked and his father not answering, and his heart seized with the specific fear that this was the year the arrangement ended, as it must eventually end, with the door remaining locked and the cabin empty. He had stood at the door with his hand on the latch for a long time before he heard, from inside, the small sounds of a man asleep in the middle of the day. He had knocked again, louder, and waited, and eventually the bolt drew back and his father stood in the doorway with the particular expression of a man woken from a deep afternoon sleep, disoriented, blinking at the April light. He said, "I was having a dream," Owen said. "Were you?" His father said, "I don't remember what it was." He looked at the yard and the season. He said, "Come inside. I'll make coffee." They never spoke of it. Owen held it, though, that specific moment of his hand on the latch in the pause before the bolt moved. The way his body had known, in that pause, that there was someone on the other side. The way the same pause, in 1903, would feel entirely different. Not different in any measurable physical way. The latch the same, the bolt the same, the resistance the same. Different in whatever it was that a person knew before knowing, in the way that Ida had set down her mending and gone to the window, in the way that Owen himself had walked the path expecting a dead man, and found something else entirely. The knowing before the knowing. He had been right to trust it in the middle year. He had been right to trust it in 1903 in the other direction. His father aged in the ordinary way of a man whose constitution was sound, slower in his movements as the decade advanced, thinner, his hearing diminished. The ordinary changes arrived at the pace they arrived. Nothing accelerated. Nothing was preserved beyond what the man himself had always been. In the 4th or 5th April, Owen asked him directly whether he felt any internal evidence of the missing time, whether there was any discontinuity, any sense of absence where the months had been. His father thought about it carefully. He said, "I feel as I always feel in spring, rested and ready. I do not feel different from how I felt in October. I feel like the same man, as though the winter had not passed over me, but through me or around me, or had been a winter I observed from somewhere outside it." He said, "I feel like a man held somewhere comfortable for a season and released into the spring, not against my will, with it. Whatever will I had available, I gave it." Owen said, "You lost the experience of it, the living of 4 months." His father said, "Yes, but I am not sure the living of it was mine to have. Some winters are for the land. This appears to be one of mine." He said this with the quality Owen had known from childhood, the quality of a man who has thought about something for a long time and has arrived at a position he will hold. Not unkind about the holding, but holding it. Owen had sat with that answer for many years. In the October of 1895, his father wrote in the journal, "The cold is coming again. I can feel it in the way I have come to feel it, not as threat, not as loss, but as the returning of a season I do not own but am given the use of, in whatever way the land gives the use of things it keeps. My son will come in April. I will be here. The spring will come. Whatever the winter asks of me, I give willingly. I have been here long enough to know that the land's keeping is not nothing. It is, in its way, everything." Owen would not read this entry until after the last winter. In the spring of 1903, Owen Marsh rode 3 days to the cabin. The yard was soft with melt. The chimney was cold. The woodpile was low. No tracks in the mud. He came to the door and knocked. He said, "Father." He waited. He put his hand on the latch and felt the resistance of the bolt on the other side, the same resistance he had felt 12 years before, on the 1st April, when he had stood in the mud expecting to find a dead man and had found something entirely different and had returned to find it every spring since. The same bolt, the same resistance, the same specific sensation of the door telling him what was on the other side. He stood there for a long time. Then he went to find tools to open the door. The cabin was empty. The fire was cold in the grate. The chair by the fireplace held the quilt folded over its arm, undisturbed. The larder was nearly bare, a winter consumed. The wood box was empty. The hash marks on the wall ran to the bottom of the space his father had always used, and the final mark was the same deliberate stroke as all the others, made with the same careful hand, in what Owen calculated from the supply accounting to be sometime in March. The journal was on the table, open. October 31st was the last entry. It read, "The cold is here, the serious cold. It has found me as it always finds me. I leave the journal open because my son will come in April, and he will want to see that I was well. I was well. I am well. The spring will come." Owen sat at the table for a long time. He sat with the open journal and the cold fire and the April light through the south window falling on the timber his father had looked at on every morning of 48 years. He sat with the full weight of what he had ridden 3 days to find and had instead not found, and he let himself feel it without managing it, because some things were not for managing. His father was not in the cabin. His father was not on the porch. Whatever had kept the fire and made the hash marks and written the final entry in the journal had not returned his father in the spring of 1903. The arrangement that had held for 12 years, the winter taken, the man returned, the bolt drawn back, had not held this time. He closed the journal. He put it in his pack with his father's other effects, the things worth carrying, the things that represented a life in a place. He did what needed to be done about the property. He rode home. He is buried at the edge of the north timber, under a simple marker, where the clearing ends and the hardwoods begin. The place he had been looking at on every morning of 48 years. The timber that had been present and unchanged through all of them. The specific view that had been his for longer than Owen had been alive. It seemed the right place. Owen had no doubt about the right place. The account of what happened to Clem Marsh beginning in the winter of 1891 is preserved in two documents. The first is Owen's own record, written that autumn and revised over the decade of visits as each April added to what could be said. He had not set out to write something for any audience. He wrote it the way his father kept the farm log, because writing things down was how certain people processed the things that happened to them, and this was a thing that required processing. The account does not embellish. It does not reach for explanation. It stays close to what was seen and heard and felt, without insisting that what was seen and heard and felt could be adequately explained. The second document is the journal itself, which Owen carried home from the cabin after the last winter and kept until the end of his life. It passed through the hands of his children and then their children, and eventually arrived in a county archive where it sat in a folder alongside the ordinary papers of ordinary lives. The journal is what it is. The October entries, building through the 28th and 29th and 30th. Then the blank pages. Then April, in the same hand, as though the blank pages were simply the space between two ordinary days. What the winters did in that place, what they did with the particular man who had been found fitting for them, who gave a season a year to whatever the serious cold required from 1891 onward, until the last winter that did not return him, is not recorded. He could not record it. He was somewhere else for those winters, or somewhere within, or somewhere that had no name in any language he had ever used. The blank pages are the full extent of what he left behind about the experience. What remains is Owen's account, written that first autumn while the details were fresh, revised across the decade of visits as each April added its evidence to the record. The journal itself, which Owen kept until the end of his life. The October entries, building through the 28th and 29th and 30th, and then nothing, and then April, and the final entry left open on the table for his son to find, two documents, both consistent, both in the same plain, unembellished manner that characterized everything Clem Marsh did, the manner of a man who recorded what was true without insisting that what was true could be explained. The account does not explain. It stays close to what was seen and heard and felt, and lets the facts hold the weight they hold without asking anything more of them. A man who gave 37 years of his complete attention to a piece of Ozark land, who was found fitting for something the serious winters required, who was kept through them and returned each spring with his 37 years intact. Until the spring, he was not returned. The door was locked from the inside. Whatever locked it is not in the record. Whatever the land found fitting in him, and whatever it did with the winters it took from him, and whatever it did in the last winter it did not return him from, these things are in the blank pages of the journal, which is to say they are nowhere that can be read. What can be read is the last entry, left open on the table. I leave the journal open because my son will come in April, and he will want to see that I was well. I was well. I am well. The spring will come. Owen came. The spring came. His father was in neither. And past the edge of the cleared ground, where a man stood splitting oak for 48 autumns and felt, one October, the specific attention of a place that had known him long enough to find him fitting. The land holds what it holds. It does not say what it has taken. It does not say where it keeps things. It keeps its winters to itself,